conclusion from the Mayo Clinic was that they estimated that I was at least 8 to 10 years younger, biologically speaking. Well, clearly, I've stumbled onto something here, something that seems to be working.
Okay, hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce you to Tiat Lim. He's a 53-year-old longevity enthusiast who is known as Singapore's Benjamin Button. He has a biological age of 29 and is ranked 30th in the Rejuvenation Olympics. Welcome, Tiat, to the show.
Thank you for having me, Lucas. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Thanks for coming. So you have obviously reduced your biological age. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into the longevity space?
Well, it was actually quite a fortuitous beginning, I guess. About 9 years ago, my sister and I decided to open a gym of our own. And we actually created our own workout program called FitRx, which is short for fitness prescription. And we apply it to ourselves. And after I did it for about 2 years, I kept getting comments saying, hey, you really don't look your age. So whatever you're doing, obviously it's working. And then I said, well, it's all well and good. It's good for the ego and all of that. But I wanted to find out whether it was actually possible to measure, in a scientific way, whether, I was actually younger on the inside or simply just looking younger on the outside. So that's when I decided to take a trip to the Mayo Clinic in the US to get my first sort of series of tests and measurements done. And the conclusion from the Mayo Clinic was that they estimated that I was at least 8 to 10 years younger, biologically speaking. So this was around 2018, right? So I told myself, well, clearly I've stumbled onto something here, something that seems to be working. So let's keep doing what I've been doing, but also with the caveat that even Mayo said that, at that point in time, there was no truly accurate way to measure biological age. So they were just giving me like ballpark numbers. Yeah. So over the last few years, I've done a few clinical studies with the universities in Singapore. That's the National University of Singapore, as well as the Nanyang Technological University. And from these clinical studies, I've acquired more sort of knowledge and understanding about aging biomarkers, primarily because it's being driven by Professor Brian Kennedy, who is with NUS. And so from the ABIOS study, I learned things like, we can measure artery age, we can measure your heart age via VO2 max, for instance. And of course, I was exposed to epigenetic testing as well. So I had my first epigenetic or DNA methylation test done during ABIOS and a few subsequent studies as well. Having done my own research, I've felt that they're kind of just sort of just looking at the tip of the iceberg. We need to drill a little bit deeper and understand the nuance. So that's the reason why I came up with my own bespoke age test, which combines clinical as well as subclinical cutoffs with biomarkers that give you a age as well as biomarkers that will support those results. Okay, so the supporting biomarkers basically prevent any kind of contradiction, put it that way. So my regime is pretty simple. My foundation is FitRx, which is essentially the exercise component. And then you've got the walls of the house, which will be Burp, which is the food component, as well as Best, which is the supplement component. And then the roof on top of the house is B, which is the sleep and stress management component, which is essentially driven by purpose, right? And then on top of the roof is something that we definitely want to get into, which is the regenerative medicine side of things, where you start looking at stem cells, primarily iPSCs, and maybe eventually we'll get to induce totipotent stem cells as well. But I think the science at this point in time basically just points towards iPSC as kind of the current state of the art and what is probably achievable within the next, I would say, maybe 5 years. And I would say that would include ultimately getting some kind of FDA or HSA in Singapore, that's our equivalent, the Health Sciences Authority approval, so that it becomes an intervention that can actually be sold to the public because it's gone through all the necessary clinical trials to do so. Yeah. So that, in a very short nutshell, is what I've been doing. So it is a combination of BEAT, which I consider the measuring tape, right? So you really, really need to have a way to measure biological age accurately. And then the rest of the components are part of what I call my de-aging pyramid. So I guess the short answer is that I'm trying to advocate for a industry standard for measuring biological age. Think of it as an ISO, right? And I think that really is the biggest lacuna in the entire longevity field right now. Because if there's no agreed upon standard for measuring biological age, how in the world can you say that your intervention either works or does not work, right? So you have many, many people making all kinds of spurious claims, that, I mean, this makes me, 10 years younger, 20 years, whatever. But I think that as a field, we actually need to come together and decide on a standard and then apply that standard universally and evenly so that any future intervention that comes along is held to that particular standard and that we won't be seeing all kinds of strange deviations, which we are seeing, in the field right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, that's the missing link, right, in the whole longevity space. There's no standardized approach to measuring biological age, and you can see that at big longevity conferences, there's a lot of debate about it. But I'd like to unpack that a little bit more about your approach, the BEAT approach. Can you give us a bit more in-depth overview of what it consists of?
Yep. Okay, so let's start with what I call the clinical cutoffs or the gold standards. Yeah. So we start with like your artery age, your heart age, your hormone age, your kidney, your muscle, and your skeleton age. Right. So all of these biomarkers have some kind of an established clinical standard that has been accepted by clinicians on a worldwide basis. Yeah. So, for example, for skeletal age, there's the DEXA scan, right? So we know that we can measure bone mineral density using the DEXA scan, and the DEXA scan can actually give you a T-score and a Z-score, which you then can benchmark against the T group being, I think it's a group of 30-year-olds, right? And then the Z group would be your age group, yeah? So with that kind of data, you can actually have a very close, a calculation of what your skeletal age in this case would be. So let's say with the Mayo Clinic in 2018, when they did my DEXA, they said, look, based on your DEXA scan, you have the skeleton of a college athlete, right? So basically, it's the 18 to 20-year-old sort of age band, yeah? So I think that is a very, very good place to start because, you can't possibly tell people, hey, I've got this fantastic, tailor-made age, for instance, but I have osteoporosis. Right? No, nobody is going to say that you are a young person, biologically young. I mean, that to me, it's if you're in that situation, it's game over, right? Because you have geriatric bones, yeah. So based on that kind of principle, when you look at the other clinical cutoffs, right, they all pass that test of having been accepted by the clinical community, right? So what you do is you then, from there, derive individual biological ages for every single, in this case, major organ or organ system, right? And then you can come up with like an average number and say, okay, all right, based on these 6 clinical cutoffs, this is your age, right? And then you look at the second category, which will be the subclinicals. And at the moment, the only 3 subclinicals that I deem to be, I guess, sort of useful would be pheno age, which is from Morgan Levine's lab, right? We've got symphony age, which is something that True Diagnostic worked on with, I think it was Yale or Harvard. Please fact check me. And then, of course, there's telomere age, right? So, because these 3 are examples of subclinicals, it basically means that clinicians worldwide have not adopted them as standards, right? But I think that at the same time, we can't just dismiss them and say, well, because doctors haven't adopted them yet, we're just going to put them to one side and just ignore them. I think that these epigenetic tests will get more and more accurate. I mean, we started with Horvath, right? And we went through Grimmage and, we're now at the pheno age. So I think there is definitely some scientific validity there. However, in contrast to the clinical cutoffs, we basically need to give the subclinicals maybe a lower weightage, right? And then you take the average subclinical age, and then you combine it with the average clinical age, and then you will come out with firstly an unweighted average and then a weighted average, right? And that is how I derived my 29 years old from these clinical and subclinical biomarkers. Yeah. And then if you want to drill down into the supporting biomarkers, I mean, you would definitely have to look at things like, it's something as simple as, let's say, your body fat percentage, right? So if you are obese, right, chances are you're not going to be biologically young, right? There's a very, very good chance that you've actually accelerated yourself because you have put your body under so much strain carrying that extra weight. Yeah. And then with the Rejuvenation Olympics that we talked about earlier on, they essentially use the Dunedin pace as the measure. But the Dunedin pace is interesting because essentially it's a speedometer, right? So it just gives you the speed or rate at which you're aging, but it doesn't actually tell you your biological age. And therefore, it is a supporting biomarker and not a conclusive cutoff. But of course, it can't be a situation where your speedometer is like, I don't know, it's like overclocking, right? And then you think that you're biologically younger. That's probably not going to be the case, okay? So that's how I've sort of reconciled what seems to be available in the field at the moment. But, if you look at the cutoffs, those are the odometers, right? So to me, the odometers will always be more important than the speedometers because ultimately it's how much mileage you're putting on your body that determines, its biological age. Yeah.
That's fantastic. It's very thorough and fully encompassing, and something that I think the field should strive for. But unfortunately, a lot of these tests are not accessible to people, partly because of financial reasons. So, is there where do you recommend people start? I guess would it be with the clinical standards, the clinical biomarkers, or somewhere else?
Well, actually, for my own clients at the moment, I tell them to just keep it really, really basic, which is if you go to your GP, so your primary care physician, and say, look, I want to do a blood test, right? They will do the usual blood panel, which will be your lipids, it'll be your glucose, that sort of stuff. But if you look at, let's say, pheno age, you can actually request for these additional tests to be done as part of the panel, right? And it's inexpensive, right? So in Singapore's context, you can get it done for the last time I did it, I think it was maybe 150 US dollars thereabouts, right? So I think that that's affordable and accessible for most people, right?
Right.
Now, then you get at least one subclinical biomarker. But if you look at even the clinicals in Singapore right now, a DEXA scan will run you probably about 150 US dollars as well. So it's not an insurmountable amount of money, right? And in fact, some insurers may even include DEXA scan as part of your your annual sort of checkup. package, depending on the premium you pay, I suppose, and your insurer, and depending on your country as well. So it's not unattainable. And something as simple as, let's say, your muscle age, all you need is to do the grip strength test. And those grip strength devices, again, not very expensive. I think if you go to some, physiotherapists or, clinics, they'll probably have it. You just pay them a certain amount and they'll just do it for you. Or in Singapore's context, if there are all these clinical studies going on, just go volunteer for them, right? And, not only will they do it for free, but in Singapore, they actually give you money, for participating in these studies. So I think there are ways that people can measure aspects of the beat, maybe not the entire thing, right, but certain aspects and elements of it will definitely be available to them. One which I think that certainly the athletes will be very familiar with is VO2 max, right? So if you do it with your tracker, it's just an algorithm, so it's just an approximation. It's not going to be super accurate, but at least it gives you a baseline of some kind. And if you're willing to shell out a few $100s, you can actually do a proper CPAT, right? Put yourself on a treadmill, where the breathalyzer or methalyzer, sorry, and get it properly measured. But again, these are not unaffordable for, I think, the vast majority of people, especially the ones who are super interested in their health. I think that this is the kind of investment that they'll be willing to make. Yeah.
I agree. Okay, let's transition to talking about the house you talk about, your longevity approach, your longevity routine. So can you talk a little bit more about your exercise, diet, supplement, and if we have time, we'll talk a little bit more about those, the roof as well.
Yeah. So FitRx, hashtag NoWimpyWorkouts, is for everybody except wimps. So it's actually pretty intense. It comprises of calisthenics, resistance, as well as burst cardio. Typically, it's a 1-hour class, but I tend to go a little bit, I guess, overboard, because for me, I work out 6 days a week, and I work out for a minimum of 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
Right? So that definitely puts me in a rarefied category. I certainly do not expect everybody to be able to do that, or to even want to do that. Right? People have different life priorities. So that's what I do for the exercise component. Okay, I'll give you an example of what we consider a moderate workout. So if you've heard of MRF,
Yeah.
MRF is where, so you basically run a mile, you do 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, you run another mile. And if you want to do it at the RX standard, you need to put on a 20-pound vest, right? So all of that, whilst wearing a 20-pound vest. For us, that is considered an easy workout. So it takes me like 41 minutes to finish it. And after that, I still go for my 7-kilometer run, because that's just not enough for me, right? So we do, I guess we do push a very high standard when it comes to the exercise component, because that is our foundation, right? So a lot of people argue, nutrition is the foundation. I'm like, nah, exercise is the foundation. Okay, nutrition supports the exercise. Yeah. So when it comes to nutrition, we have our program known as the BURP, or the Bespoke Eat Right program. And I think the key to the BURP program is the first step, which is we say, look, you need to avoid soap, right? Sugar, oil, additives, processed food, right? If you avoid that, you're halfway there, all right? And then we will teach you things like portion control. We'll teach you food preparation, so it's like, boil, grill, steam, stew, air fry, that's all good. If you can, just don't do anything with oil, right? So no deep frying, even stir frying, we do dry fry. Okay. So that's nutrition, or plus the fact that we are omnivores, so we eat everything. We certainly do not cut carbs. I have carbs every single meal, and that's 3 meals a day: breakfast, lunch, dinner. Yeah. And
so there's no fasting component?
Oh, hell no. To me, I just tell people, please don't starve yourself, right? And there are three euphemisms for starvation, right? Dieting, fasting, and restriction, right? So we avoid all of the above, right? In fact, when we eat until we're nice and full, right? So it's not about depriving yourself, okay? But of course there are some tweaks. So when you look at carbs, for instance, we tell people, can you try to choose complex carbs versus simple carbs, right? So a piece of white bread versus like a wholemeal bread, for instance, go for the wholemeal, right? Something with like a more sort of medium GI would be good. Okay, so that gives you an indication whether it's complex or simple, right? If it's 100, then you know it's 100% simple sugar, right? So that would be part of the guidelines, and we definitely tell people to please eat your meat. All sorts of meat are good. Please don't just eat fish. Please eat red meat. All of any kind of animal that you enjoy eating. That's what you do. Okay. So that's the nutrition, and then in terms of supplementation, we've got the best, which is the bespoke supplement stack. Currently, it comprises of about I'd say 2 dozen supplements. But really, the most important supplement of all is whey protein, as far as I'm concerned. Simply because most people don't get enough protein through their regular food. So this form of supplementation is actually essential, right? And then follow closely with, like, I would say, creatine, right? But that you kind of I think you catch my drift, because when it comes to supplementation, we look very much towards sports supplementation, right? So it's not I don't know, can I call them hippy dippy? But yeah, there's a lot of hippy dippy stuff out there right now that fall into the supplement category, which I would avoid. Some of which I've tried, right, and self-experimented on. But really, it's the sports supplement category that I find delivers the best results. Simply because we've had all these athletes as guinea pigs,
Right.
that have been experimenting on themselves for years, right? So it's not just the bodybuilding community, but it's like there have been lots of athletes who've been taking creatine, for instance. And the reason why we know why it's so safe, and efficacious, is because we've got tons of data, right, from these people experimenting on themselves, right? So that's where we stand when it comes to supplementation. Um, when it comes to B, which is bespoke exist, I guess I would call it sort of a mindset thing. I think that having a purpose in life helps you to manage stress a lot better, because you probably be able to say, well, because this is my mission, the stress that comes with trying to achieve my mission is actually, I know, it's like it may even give you a dopamine rush. It's like, hey, clearly I'm headed in the right direction. Okay. And it's hard, but it's hard for a reason, right? It's because I'm trying to achieve this goal, right? Whatever the goal
Like a
is,
hormesis
you first
effect, I
define.
guess, right? Like a
Yeah.
hormesis effect. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. And at the same time, because because you have this goal that you're trying to achieve, you have this mission. I think it really helps with sleep as well. I sleep soundly at night. When my head hits the pillow, it's lights out, right? Because I know that I've been on mission, right? I've done everything that I was supposed to do that day, and I sleep like a baby, basically, right? And I sleep between 8 to 9 hours every night. So for me, that's, I think, what people should be aiming for. I think that anything less than 8 is probably not desirable from a longevity standpoint. That's where we are right now. So as I said, the B is the roof, but on top of the roof, we can put something else. So think of it as put Starlink on top of the roof. And for me, Starlink is regenerative medicine, or we call it the bespoke regenerative medicine component. We haven't started that yet, but we definitely want to begin the R&D process, and specifically focus on iPSCs, right? So everybody talks about longevity, escape velocity, right? So what in the world does that mean? For me, it's really simple. It's a countdown, right? So right now, I'm hashtag 50 is the new 30, right? But if we get the burn program, get it right, then 100 will be the new 30, right? So that to me is what escape velocity looks like. It means that I managed to freeze my biological age at 30 indefinitely, right? And that is ultimately what I am striving for. Yeah.
That's fantastic. That seems like a very, again, thorough approach to longevity. Can you just touch on quickly the longevity community in Singapore? It seems like Singapore is being called now the sixth blue zone. There's obviously a lot of top researchers. There's the NUS, NUHS. So how is your approach integrating with the, I guess, scientific and medical centers, and talk about the community in general, how they're approaching longevity in Singapore?
Yeah. So, I mean, my entry into this world was actually courtesy of Professor Brian Kennedy, right? We met pretty soon after he arrived in Singapore. He came and visited my gym, took a look at me and went, "Wow, I think you need to enroll in the clinical study." So I'm like, "Okay, that sounds good." So yes, there's a lot of talk about Singapore being sort of an epicenter for longevity at this point in time. That's very heartening. Um, and for us specifically, we actually do have a clinical study proposal that we've drafted with NUS, for which we are currently seeking grant funding. It will be a pilot study, maybe an N20. And what it will do is allow us to validate both the beat as well as our interventions, meaning FitRx and burp, and of course our supplements as well, over a 6-month period to begin with. And then if the results are promising, then obviously we want to scale it for maybe to a 12-month with a much larger N size in terms of study cohort. So things are happening in Singapore. It's nice to be called Blue Zone 2.0. I think that was the term that was used. But we actually believe that we can become Blue Zone 3.0. And my definition of 3.0 is a de-aging nation where health span equals lifespan and disease span equals 0, right? And no nation on earth has achieved that as of yet. Hopefully Singapore will be that nation.
Hopefully, yes. I look forward to seeing the clinical studies. Hopefully, they go through, and look forward to seeing that data. So I know you are out of time, so I'd like to thank you for your time today, for coming on and sharing your approach. And where can people find you to learn more about your approach and possibly even work with you?
So my website is www.theaging.guru. My social media handles are at theaging.guru for TikTok as well as Instagram. And my YouTube channel is at theaging.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tiat, for your time today. And I'll be keeping an eye on you and your progress in the future.
It's been a pleasure. Nice talking to you, Lucas.
You as well. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.